Speaker this morning is Al Roth. His topic is organ donation and solicitation in the U.S. and Israel. Al, please.
Thank you. I think they are.
I need those flashes. You know, I need to flash minutes in his face. Poor fellow.
He's hard to control. Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, so I'm glad to be here. The most recent pictures I had of Jean-François were from the Calais retirement 65th birthday conference in 2007, and you see Jean-François next to some familiar figures, including next to Uri Rothblum, whose memorial conference I'll be going to on Tuesday at the Technion. So it's a funny season. So I'm going to talk to you today about some experiments that are have a game theoretic flavor, but this will not be an intensely game theoretic talk. I've been interested for some time in transplantation, and some of you may have followed my work on kidney exchange, which involves transplantation of living donors. And I blogged this morning. There recently was some kidney exchange in Israel. But today I'm going to talk to you about deceased donation. So most organs still come from deceased donors. Kidneys have the opportunity of coming from live donors, but most organs cannot come from live donors. And I'll be speaking about work with Judd Kessler, who's now a professor at University of Pennsylvania at Wharton. And I'm going to pick up in the middle of a series of papers, but in particular, I'm going to talk to you about a paper that's related to recent Israeli legislation on how to manage the organ donor allocation and solicitation. And organs are scarce resources of a little bit of an unusual sort, because how you allocate them may influence how scarce they are, because you also can influence the decisions of donors, whether to register to be donors and to contribute on the donation list. And if there's time, I'll tell you also about some somewhat related work that we do involving how we ask for organ donations in the United States. So I'm going to have to tell you a little bit about organs. And then I'm also, the subtext of this talk is what are experiments good for? Because, of course, organ donation is a complicated story with lots of issues that are hard to abstract away from. But at the same time, we're going to be talking about the architecture of incentives. And so what I'll be studying in the laboratory in the first experiment is just the architecture of incentives. That is, I'll be talking to you about in a game theoretic environment abstracted away from actual organ donation. What I'll be talking about in the second experiment, though, is actual registration on the organ donor registry. So one of the things we should try to think about is, that I'll try to help you think about is what are experiments good for and what are their limitations in trying to talk about these complicated visceral issues. So the background is that there are a number of diseases for which the best treatment is transplantation, and there's a big shortage of organs. But in the United States, the way we mostly get deceased donor organs is when we register for our driver's licenses. So when you go to get a California driver's license, which I recently did when we moved to California, you're asked, would you like to be on the organ donor registry? And there's a little mark on my driver's license that indicates that I said yes. But if I hadn't said yes, if I hadn't filled in that question, then I wouldn't be on the registry. And that's what's called an opt-in procedure, and that's what's used pretty much throughout the United States, although some states are starting to use what's called mandated choice, and the second experiment that I'll talk to you about is about that. Organ allocation in the United States is different by organ. Different organs are allocated differently. There are different ways of managing waiting lists, but there are waiting lists. And the same thing is true in Israel. Different organs have different criteria for how you rise to the head of the waiting list. But recently, a proposal has been adopted in Israel that has the effect that if you are on the organ donor registry, it can give you some additional priority to receive an organ should you need to receive one. And again, there are many things that go into priority. The priority that you get for being registered as a potential donor is a tie-breaking priority. That is, if you and someone else with otherwise similar priority are both waiting for the same organ, and one of you is registered to be a donor and the other not, then the organ will go to the one who's registered. But needless to say, I'm not going to talk about this today, when you pass legislation like that, you have to think a lot about who is not eligible to sign up. So children will always have priority as if they were signed up, things like that. Okay, so the motivation for the Israeli law is a complicated Israeli thing, which reads much differently in the United States than it does here. But here's an article from The Lancet, and the lead author is Yaakov Lavi, who's an Israeli heart transplant surgeon. And what he's concerned with is the fact, what he did is he in The Lancet, he published a survey of Israeli public. What he's concerned is that the consent rate for people who die in a way that they could become organ donors, the consent rate is lower in Israel than it is in other Western countries. And one of the so they did a survey prior to this legislation that found that the Israeli public seemed willing to consider priority for donors on the registration list. And one of the things that they're concerned about is, he says, the perceived need to rectify the unfairness of what he calls free riders, people who are willing to accept an organ but refuse to donate one, as practiced by a small yet prominent proportion of the Israeli public. So he's talking about, for deceased donors, he's talking about the question of when are you dead. And it can be complicated to decide when you're dead. Organs that are suitable for donation in the United States mostly come from people who are brain dead and who die while on a ventilator, so that their organs are being still kept alive. It's also possible to get organs for people who are DCD. It used to mean deceased from cardiac death, but now it means from circulatory death, because you can have heart transplants from people who are DCD. But you have to act very quickly. So if someone is not on a ventilator when he dies, you have to decide that he is dead almost immediately after heartbeat stops. So my surgical colleagues in the United States who are involved in transplantation say that there's a sort of a wall between the people who decide that someone is dead and those who begin preparation for transplant, but that wall takes 5 minutes to breach. So you have to work very quickly if the person is not on a ventilator, because otherwise the organs also die. So that's the complicated Israeli question about whether, how quickly you are dead if you are DCD. So I'm going to tell you about some experiments based on the kind of legislation that has resulted. And again, I warn you that the first experiment I'm going to tell you about is very abstract. So I'm talking about organs and about all these complicated issues about who is dead. We're not going to see any of that in the experiment. What we're going to see in the experiment is a public goods provision, a kind of public goods provision, the kind that organs are. They are public goods in prospect, but not in realization, right? An actual organ is a very private good, but the possibility of getting transplantation is a public good. I'm going to look at a public goods provision environment that gives priority to those who are willing to contribute. And there are a lot of obstacles to doing experiments with actual organ registrations, although I'll tell you about one before I'm done. And one of them, of course, is that you can't use money dealing with organs. The little bit of American law that says this is, it's a felony to pay money for organs. Incidentally, throughout most of the West, this is the law. There are interesting religious issues here too. The Christian churches are all opposed to any ideas about having money for organs. There's a legal market for sale in the Islamic Republic of Iran. One of the senior poseks who deals with halakhic issues of this sort was a guy named Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And in his response, he seemed to indicate that it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to have money involved in donation of organs. So these are complicated issues, also beyond the scope of my talk today. But I hasten to caution you that we're not going to be able to go immediately from the conclusions we see in our experiment to those in actual organ donation. So So let me tell you a little bit about the Israeli legislation. And one of the things about market design in general is you can write legislation that that seems to define the game, but people in the world have big strategy sets. So one of the things about being a game theorist who does market design instead of a game theorist is when I was young, when we wanted to study a game, we wrote it down, and that was the game we wanted to study. And if we had wanted to study a different game, we would have written down a different game. But when you're doing market design, you sort of guess what the game is, and then people start playing, and some of them come up with moves that you didn't anticipate, and that turns out to be part of the game too. So we're never quite confident that we understand what the game is. So the Israeli donor card, as it appears, says a couple of things. Here's the donor card. So this is the thing that will get you priority on the allocation list if you have signed it. And it says, in order that I can help another, I donate my organs, and you can choose to donate, all of your organs or just some of them. But then there's this additional card, the additional check that says, a clergyman, an ishdat, right? A clergyman chosen by my family should help decide whether I am dead. And so the question is, what will be the effect of that if you have filled out your organ donor card this way, but checked the box that says a clergyman chosen by my family has to approve the donation? There's a possibility that you could have filled out the card so that you are eligible for priority, but that when your death comes to pass, you will not actually become a donor if the clergyman chosen by your family thinks that you aren't dead yet. So, did I?
The logic of that is not clear. I mean, whether it's 1 or 2 and 3, and N3 applies to both 1 and 2, or only to 2. I just don't,
No, it's a square.
It's a square, I know, it's different, but it begs a question. Okay.
It obviously.
Okay, it's different to both. But
The point is, before you can be a deceased donor, you have to be deceased. Okay? There's some question about deceased. So the question is, who decides? Okay. So obviously, this is the kind of thing that's going to lend itself to empirical study, and we've been part of a grant for data that will eventually allow us to understand how this is working in Israel. But and so one of the things you want to know is who will fill out the cards, and how many, which of the boxes will be checked, and how often. And then eventually, as people die in ways that make them eligible to be donors, how many transplants will actually happen. That is, what happens. But that's going to take a lot of time. So one of the advantages of experiments is, it'll take years before people who just signed this card in any significant numbers start to become donors. But we can start to do experiments right now with priority, with various kinds of options. So we're going to do an experiment, abstracted now completely away from are you dead or alive, with this idea of priority, and see what it does. So subjects are going to come into our laboratory, and they're going to play a 2-period game. And we present it to them in this abstract way. We say you start each round with an A unit and 2 B units. So if you like, you can, that's a mnemonic. You can think of A unit as your brain and B units as your kidneys. But we don't say anything like that to them. You're going to start each round with 1 A unit and 2 B units. And each game, in the second period, you're going to either need a B unit or have an A unit failure. And subjects who need and receive a B unit will earn an extra $4 per round. So to get a transplant of a B unit is worth $4 to you in this experiment. And you can get a B unit from another player only if someone who agreed to donate had an A unit failure. And agreeing to donate has a cost. So in the first period of the game, you sign that donor registration card, in effect. You decide whether you are registered or not. And the cost is either 50 cents, which is going to be for most people. There are going to be groups of 8 people, and 6 of them will have this relatively low cost to sign. And 2 of them in each group will have this very high cost, very high in the sense that this is equal to the full benefit you get from a transplant. So in the experiment, we would expect that no one who has a $4 cost will agree to be a donor, because the benefit and the cost don't make sense. But the experiment, the treatment will be how the B units are assigned. So in the control condition, all potential recipients will have an equal chance at receiving available organs, available B units. And this is meant to model the sort of current United States system where there's a waiting list, but when you become ill, is random. So if there are more people who need B units than there are B units, then you just have equal probability of getting them. Then there'll be a priority condition, which is modeled on the new Israeli legislation that I just spoke to you about. And it says that those who choose to donate and pay the cost of donation receive priority. So B units will be assigned randomly among people with equal priority, but people who haven't paid the cost of donation will not receive transplants unless there are so many organs available that everyone who has priority has already received. With our parameters, that won't happen typically. And then we have this condition that's like the Ishtat condition, like the clergyman condition, or perhaps like the clergyman condition.
Cost of donation, that's $4?
Say again.
What's the cost of donation? $4?
Cost of donation, it could be for you.
Whatever it is for the donor.
Yes, you donate at the beginning, not knowing whether you will be a donor or a recipient in stage 2. But you know your cost. You know your cost, yes. So you look at your cost, you decide whether or not to donate, and then you're going to be, you already know you're going to be in one of these conditions. You'll know what you're playing. You either be in a control condition where donating gives you no particular benefit, or you'll be in a priority condition where it gives you priority, or you'll be in a condition which is like the priority condition, except you can get priority without paying the cost and without making your B units available just by asking for it. Okay, so this is a tough interpretation of that clergyman condition. This is under the assumption that if you check the clergyman box, then you are not a donor.
Do you tell the subjects what this is all
No,
about?
not at all. Not at all. So this is a public goods experiment. As far as they're concerned, we're talking about, it looks a lot like our other public goods experiments in this experiment. I'll tell you about one next where they become actual organ donors in Massachusetts, where at the end of the experiment, if they choose to. But this one, we tell them A units and B units. Okay, we definitely do not tell them what it's about. I'm sorry, say again. Do they know that it's personally my experiment? My name is probably on the consent form. But I am less well known than you think, if you think that seeing my name on the consent form will cause them to think about organs. So they play 30 rounds. I'll show you the data in fixed groups of 8 subjects. 15, so it's a little bit of a complicated experimental design. There's going to be within and between subjects. So we're going to have different subjects start and play 15 rounds under the different conditions. Then we're going to have them switch conditions just to give us some inter-subject effects. And they have 6 low-cost donors and 2 high-cost donors. And another variable is what information they have about all this. So I've told you all the information about the experiment, but they will either just know their own cost of donation, find out whether they needed a B unit and whether they got one. That's low information. Or in high information, they'll be told what everybody's costs are. They'll know that there are 2 $4 players and the rest are 50 cents. They'll know who donated and how many checked the loophole condition. So in high information, at the end of each period, we tell them everything that happened. In low information, we just tell them what happened to them. Okay? I'm sorry. They are anonymous as individuals, but they are in a fixed group of 8. So they are sitting in a large laboratory. They don't know who they're playing with, but they know that over the course of their experience in the lab, they are in the same group of 8. Okay, so here's the experimental design. Yes?
What was their motivation to understand this information?
It's not so easy to understand, but they're going to play 30 rounds, so over time they will come to understand it by getting their outcomes. If they, I mean, we give them instructions and we check a little bit if they understood, but this is a game that some people may want to look at the beginning, some people may want to look at the end. By having played it 30 times, they will get some experience playing the game. And their motivation is that they make money in the laboratory according to how they do. So, like other laboratory experiments, they are more or less motivated and more or less informed. But you'll see that the results are not random. So in particular, the first results I'm showing you are the low information control condition. These look a lot like what we see in other public goods experiments. It's a dominated, if all you care about is your cash payoff in this experiment, it's a dominated strategy to donate. No one should donate because it costs you something, and you get nothing in return. You can't donate to yourself. There's no priority in this condition. But it does good for other people. When you donate, it has the chance of giving someone else $4. So, and it only costs you 50 cents. So what you see is we start off with a pretty high level of donation that deteriorates over time, and there's no big effect. Some of these people are playing it after having played 15 rounds of something else, and these guys are playing it in the first 15. There's no big startup effect. So this is the control condition. We begin and we end with substantial amounts of donation.
It's surprising that they still didn't catch it.
Pardon me?
If you make 30 more, I guess it will go down.
It goes down. It tends not to go. It doesn't go to zero. It doesn't go to zero. Right. It doesn't go to zero. Some people are contributing because they like to. They are helping out their colleagues, and they're encouraging their colleagues to help them out by doing that. It's a repeated game.
7 rounds for people to start going down significantly.
Say again?
I don't know. I remember.
Well, it doesn't go to zero. Yeah.
Just clear on this, but in the instruction that they're really good for others.
Well, remember, if you get $4, if you get a kidney, yeah.
I mean,
Let's see.
you think they see this that they can.
They sometimes get. I mean, right? Sometimes subjects who need and receive a B unit earn an extra $4. So they understand whenever they get that $4 that someone else agreed to donate. Yes.
But they don't know each other.
Not at all.
And they never meet doing the 30
They
rounds?
never meet. They are sitting at computer terminals that are sort of isolated from each other. They're in a big room together. I mean, there are 30 of them.
Well, but during the mission, they talk to each other and find out they're going.
Well, they can't talk to each other from the beginning to the end. I mean, they could talk to each other afterward if they wish. But it's hard to tell if we were in the same group. Right? I mean, it's a room like this. Everyone is sitting at a computer. Afterward, we can compare experience, but I can't tell whether there was a round where I could have used a B unit and you didn't donate one. There's no way for me to know that. Are we good? Okay, so here's the control condition. Here's the priority condition. It looks a lot like the control condition, but with a much higher level of contribution. Okay, so these are guys who are getting priority for a B unit when they agree to contribute one in case it's their A unit that fails. And they have a similar pattern, gentle decline, but not much, and much higher level. And here's the loophole condition. Loophole condition is right on top of the control condition. And it shouldn't surprise you. I'll show you. It shouldn't surprise you that it's right on top, because basically in the loophole condition, some people donate, right? Quite a few people donate, the same number. But everyone gets priority, because people who don't donate ask for priority without donating. And so when everyone has priority, it's the same as when no one has priority. That is, it's exactly the same game once everyone says, why don't I have priority even though I'm not donating? Okay, so it's not surprising that these are the same. Now let's look at them under high information. Okay, here's the control condition, and it looks just as you would expect.
What everybody did.
Yes.
Is only what happened to you.
Yes. So in low, you know just whether you needed a B unit and got one or not at the end of each period. In high, you also know what everyone else did, how many were contributed, and how many received, how many didn't, how many took the loophole and got priority but didn't contribute, and you also know the costs of everyone else. Yes, at 15 we switch conditions, so it's within subject design as well as between. So you play one of the conditions for 15 periods, and then you play another one, except for 3 groups that play control in both to make sure there's not a restart effect. But this is a break in the data. And these guys who are playing priority, they were playing either control or loophole for the first 15. So think of their data as being like this, and then they play priority and they jump up to there, right? So they play it without, it doesn't bother them that they've just finished playing 15 periods. Yes. It goes both ways, absolutely. There it is. You got it. We tell them that after 15 rounds, we're going to give them new instructions. We don't tell them what they're going to do in the next 15 rounds. Okay, so here's high information, control, priority, and loophole. Now loophole is lower. Okay, And now we're reporting how many people are taking the loophole. And that poisons the pool a little bit. It makes them not like to contribute when some people are getting priority without contributing. So when you look at the difference between low and high information, you see high information enhances what's happening. Here's priority with low information and with high information, and here's loophole with low information and with high information, right? It cuts it down. And what I said is what's going on in the loophole is the red bars are the guys who are not donating and not taking the loophole priority, right? So there's very little red bar. Mostly everyone gets priority when there's loophole. So what can we say about loophole? You know, priority seems to work in this abstract environment. But when it has a loophole and you advertise in detail what's going on in the loophole, it seems to undermine the effect. So you know, so when you think about perhaps what data to organize, that's part of the design of the system. You know, it's possible that you can that you don't have to broadcast all the data that you get, because these are complicated stories. You know, some of the secular Israeli physicians I talk to, they are quite hot under the collar about this. You know, they feel that some of the religious community are really free riders. But you know, I'm involved so the guys who are the motive force behind this law are heart transplant surgeons. But I'm also involved with kidney transplant surgeons because of kidney exchange. It turns out the religious community is a big source of living kidney donors in the United States as well. There's a Hasidic group in New York called Renewal that's got a lot of undirected donors, kidneys. It turns out undirected donors in the United States, there's faith-based donors, they're about a third, and then there's a big group of policemen and firemen who give organs. So this is complicated stuff, and needless to say, I've abstracted away from all of that in this experiment. So something to think about.
Is there any kind of giving other than warm glow? Why do you call it warm glow?
Warm glow is, well, actually, let me tell you about that. So I can answer that question better with the next slide. So let's think about the incentives in this. I won't give you a full model, but there's two countervailing incentives. Supposing there are not enough organs. So if there's a waiting list, from priority, you get a benefit from donating. But if there's no waiting list, it might still be a dominated strategy or not a best reply to donate, because if there are enough organs, then you don't need priority. But let's suppose we just switch from no priority to priority. The question is, what are the best reply dynamics? If no one was contributing before, then there's no benefit to having priority, because you'll only have to donating in order to get priority, because there were no organs before, and you can't donate to yourself. So there's no benefit to being the first guy to have priority. But the reason there's a benefit is there's this pool of people, and this is where the warm glow comes in. There's this pool of people who you can only model as having negative cost of donation, right? I'm a registered donor. I feel better when I have my driver's license if I'm a donor. So my cost of donating is negative. And 40% of Americans are registered donors. I've modeled it as having a cost. So if you want to look at the guys who incur the cost, they must have a negative cost. That is, they like contributing. That's the warm glow. That's a technical term from the public choice literature.
What other kind of
well, so priority is not warm glow. You get something back when you get priority.
If you get priority. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Warm glow is just, it makes you feel good. Yeah. So if there's already a pool of donors, priority has a lot of force. When the new priority law comes in, you could get priority. So it turns out there's an organization in the United States that's trying to organize a priority system as a private club. And this doesn't work because there's no existing pool of organs to get priorities for. So so these guys call themselves life sharers, and they have a club. You don't have to read their stuff, but it says priority. If you join life sharers, you have to tell your next of kin that you joined life sharers, and your intention, should you die in a way that makes your organs available, is to first try to give to another member of the organization. And here they were in 2011. You could see they had not quite, 14,000 people. We're 300 million people in the United States. And here they are at the end of 2012, and another year of great growth, and they are not quite 15,000 people. So there are exactly 0 of these guys, and indeed they have never had a transplant. And it makes sense that there should be 0, because it's really costly to join them, in the sense that you have to explain to your spouse that this, in case you die on your motorcycle when you're riding without your helmet, that not only will she have to do all the other things, but that you'll have to fight with the organ recovery people to explain your complicated last wishes. So, but of course this is very different from the Israeli legislation, which gives you immediate access to the whole pool of Israeli donors. So if we were to have a national system in the United States, it would similarly give you access to the 11,000 deceased donors who were successfully transplanted last year. Yeah. Yeah. Clergymen chosen by your family. So I'm guessing you know that someone can anticipate, but that's an empirical question, right? Eventually, I would like to know how often this box is checked and how often transplants result. Could be. We had the gamble as being a certainty here, and so the question is, how much of a gamble are you taking when you check that? And I think a lot depends on what you say to your family. But I'll tell you a little about that gamble. Pardon me? Not yet. It's since January is the law. No, you may. Well, there will be data. Possibly it should not be widely broadcast every year as part of a, So donors are important. Let me move on to the next experiment, because I've gotten my first time check. And I want to tell you about an experiment done in a more American context, where we actually are going to have, so now I told you about an abstract experiment where we had A units and B units. Now I want to tell you about an experiment where you can register on the state of Massachusetts organ donor registry. And so we didn't recruit subjects by telling them that, but we did recruit them by saying that in order to come to our experiment, you had to have a Massachusetts driver's license, because that's the method by which how you identify yourself to the organ donor registry. And so we told them in advance that they had to come and be prepared to identify themselves on a registry. And we took some care to make sure that we didn't preserve this information and interesting issues with the IRB. So when they come in the lab, they learn that they're going to log on to the Massachusetts Organ and Donor Tissue Registry and have the opportunity to change their status and then take a survey. So when I say change the status, when you log on, this is the Massachusetts webpage. It's not the one that we show them. It asks you for your identifying information. Here's our page. We ask you for the same information. Hold on, let's see. And one of the things it tells you when you sign on is it says your current organ and tissue donor status is, and this person is, no, I am not in the organ and tissue donor registry. So about 60% of our subjects are going to get this information when they log on, and about 40% are going to get the reverse. I am presently in the registry. And in both cases, they'll have an opportunity to change their status. So I'm going to tell you about the ones who are not registered, so that when they change their status, they're becoming registered.
The proportion among students is the same?
Yes, the proportion was virtually the same. I think I have that somewhere. Okay, so our web cover will record their interaction in both directions. So we discover, as they do, whether they are donors or not when they come into the lab. And then we know what they say to the registry, so we know whether they are donors or not when they leave the laboratory. But then we erase all their personal information. So we know, I'll tell you the statistics of who does what, but I can't today sign on with their driver's license number and social security number and check their current status. I'll show you what we show them. Here's the first screen that they see, and then oh no, I don't have the screen. We show them the same information, but on our own screen, because of, this is real information. Oh, absolutely.
This is real information, and the change will be real.
The change will be real. When they if you become a donor in our experiment and you leave the laboratory and are hit by a truck, you are a donor. Fortunately, that.
If you're not in my practice, I have time when you get home to change it again.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what happens if you are not a donor, because it turns out in Massachusetts, we get about 100% almost of the eligible donors who are on the registry, but we get about 50% of the eligible donors who are not on the registry, because then you ask the next of kin. You ask I'll tell you about that. You ask the next of kin. If you ride your motorcycle without a helmet, and you become brain dead on a ventilator, and you're on the registry, the organ donation people, they approach your next of kin and they say, you know that Bob is a donor, and the conversation goes from there. If you're not on the registry, they say, so what do you think about organ donation? And so they get almost everyone who's a donor. They don't take without consent of next of kin. But when you start off by saying you know he's a donor, almost everyone agrees. And about 50% agree when they're not registered. So that's something to think about, because here's the experiment that I'm going to tell you about. We're going to change the way we ask. Right now, we ask opt-in. You can say yes, or you can skip the question. So if you are not a donor, it means you didn't say yes. But an alternative, being approached in some states now, is to say you must say yes or no. That is, when you go to the Driver's License Bureau, if you haven't filled in question 17, the nice lady at the Driver's License Bureau will hand you back the form and say, you didn't fill in question 17, you have to say yes or no. Maya? Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Singapore doesn't ask the next of kin, but almost everywhere else, no one wants to take organs without approval of the next of kin. Now, in Israel, I guess they're contemplating that. I mean, you are contemplating that. Okay, so they're gonna see either a request to opt in or as mandated choice, and they're gonna either see it with a list of organs or not. So here's what opt-in looks like with no list, and here's the actual screen, but I'll read it to you better from here. On this website, you can choose to be an organ and tissue donor in the event of your death. Then they get a statement that says it's a good thing, but without a specific list. It's estimated that one donor can save or enhance the lives of as many as 50 people by donating organs. Those who register as organ donors agree to donate all their organs and tissues. That's different than in Israel. It's different than in some states of the United States, but that's how we register in Massachusetts. You can't, you're either all in or you're not. Americans, it turns out, when given a choice, have a particular reluctance to donate eyes, but that's not an option in Massachusetts. If you continue without checking the box, you will not be registered. Okay, so here's what it looks like. You can say, I want to register, or you can press continue. Yes, I'm sorry? I can't hear. Oh, yeah.
Different organs.
Different organs. Yeah, kidney donors give one kidney. Deceased donors give the whole business.
It's just an upper bound. No more than 50. That's what it says. It doesn't say.
Yeah.
You can
That's right.
donate organs.
It's an upper bound.
Skin can be given to about 50 people. I'm giving a talk to donate North America.
There you go. So you like the number 50? That's a good number?
I actually hate it because they told me you can give organs to 8 people and skin to 50 people. So I started looking at my skin, thinking it was going to be sliced and diced. And in fact, I'm going to talk to them about menstrual level theory, about the fact that you don't need to be incredibly graphic.
Very good, but that's right. They think of burn bandages and hip replacements use cartilage and all sorts of. Right, turns out you are more valuable alive than dead, but still. Okay, so we can also have mandated choice. We can say you either have to say I want to register as an organ tissue donor or I don't, and if you fail to click one of these and press continue, you get an annoying noise and a reminder that you have to click one of them in order to continue. And we can also say 50 people by donating the following organs and tissues, and we just give a list. Okay, so the results are our subject pool. I have 5 minutes. Our subject pool looks a lot like Massachusetts average. 42% were already donors. The other 58% are not donors, which incidentally means they all have Massachusetts driver's license, so they're not donors even though they have had a previous opportunity to become donors. Okay, so that's the group They haven't said no, they just haven't said yes. They have Massachusetts driver's license, which they got without becoming donors, which means they skipped failed to say yes on the question that would have allowed them to. Say again?
How long?
How?
It's clear that everybody went through a round of renewal and had already checked the box, or not?
They all have driver's licenses. It's been forever. Yeah, they all have.
You can skip this item.
You can skip it. You just don't say yes. You get your license. You don't check yes. You are not a donor. It's been for many years. Yeah. So part of our title of our paper is "Don't Take No for an Answer," and one of the reasons is because when you ask again, 29% of the non-donors become donors, but almost no one who is a donor takes themselves off. So it looks like the preference for being a donor is more stable than the preference for not being a donor.
And this is for real.
This is for real. They are donors. They are donors. And so initial non-donors become donors at very high rates, whereas initial donors stay donors. Okay? So the second part, let's look at mandated choice. Yes, Elon.
Do you have the information how many of them changed their mind?
We don't. We erase their. We can't go on with your driver's license. We do not know. I don't know. Could. It's a little hard to get on and stuff. My guess is that they're all where they are. Yeah. These are mostly, about 3/4 of them are college population, university population in Boston area, and about 1/4 are unaffiliated adults from. They're pretty young. No, it's not age related. We do regressions. I'm going to have to from quickly. Let me say that mandated choice does not cause more registrations. It seems to cause somewhat fewer registrations, but that's not significant. But now I'm going to do an experiment on the next of kin. I'm going to say, supposing you are the next of kin of a person who is not on the donor registration list, what do you infer? What do you think the next of kin should do? And just incidentally, so here in Massachusetts, as I said to you, we get just about everyone who dies in an eligible way who is registered, but we get about half the people who are not registered, right? You approach the next of kin, you say, what do you think about organ donation? And half of them say yes year after year. So we did a hypothetical study of a survey. We say, supposing someone dies, and what you know is that they were or were not an organ donor, and this is what they saw. They did opt-in, or so he checked the box and was registered, or left the box blank and was not registered. And then we compare that with mandated choice. You know that he either checked, I want to register, or checked, I do not want to register. And we asked for each combination whether they thought the next of kin should donate the organs of the deceased. And let me give you some results. What you see is that if they're registered, everyone agrees the next of kin should donate. But if they're not registered, and they're not registered by mandated choice, then fewer people think that they should donate. So not only isn't mandated choice giving us as high registration rates, it will give us, we suspect, it will give us lower conversion rates for non-registered. If you're not registered to donate because you merely failed to register, that may cause your next of kin to infer different things than if you're not registered because you chose, I do not wish at this time to be registered. Next of kin may be more likely to donate the organs of someone who failed to opt in rather than selected no in mandated choice. Let me sort of stop there. Let's see if I have some. So our general conclusions are that priority allocation can increase the number of registered donors. You have to think hard about the design. Loopholes are complicated. We should probably ask people to become donors more often. And mandated choice doesn't seem to us like a sure way to increase donation. On the contrary, we suspect it may not. This flies in the face of recent research based on, we think, less convincing evidence that suggests the opposite. This whole question is complicated, and let me close by sort of saying that, you know, one way to tell that it's complicated is we have all these laws against compensating donors. There are lots of interesting questions, I think, for economists to study about what things we allow to be bought and sold and what we don't. Experiments give us a window on some of these things, but enormous caution has to be used in generalizing from experiments to policy. I'll leave you there. Thank you.
Let's allow a couple more.
I can't hear you.
What ought to be sold or not sold. I'm wondering if it's a question for economists or philosophers.
So you phrased it differently than I do. I don't think economists should study what ought to be sold or not sold. I think economists should study and understand better what people think ought to be sold and not sold. Because it turns out that lots of people, non-economists, have intuitions about these questions, often quite different from the intuitions that economists have. And as social scientists, we would do well to understand better what people think of markets and of the options that should be made available. There's an old joke about the difference between economists and sociologists is that economists study what choices you make and sociologists study why you don't have any choices. And of course, in markets that don't exist, we don't have choices.
Bob, you'll ask.
I'd like to comment on Elhanan's question. I think economists should study what should be sold and what not, because economists are equipped to study incentives. And if you can sell or not sell, that creates different incentives. And the incentive element is very important, which very many people who are not economists are not aware of. Just what incentives are created by this system or that system?
Yep, all right, I certainly agree with that.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Very good. It's your
Thank you.
It's your show.